So these fragmented transit systems can really, we're recording now, can really limit mobility and workforce access and economic development. So across the country, RTAs have proven to be effective in creating seamless regional networks. So we're here to advocate for the state legislature to allow RTAs to allow more flexibility regionally for transit here. And we do have Colton here, and I'll hand it off to him. He's going to talk a little bit about some work that he did as a student at University of Wisconsin-La Crosse in studying the legislation history for transit.
Wonderful. Hi. So yeah, I'm Colton, and I did this study looking at the legislation around RTAs in Wisconsin over the past couple decades. So yeah, it's starting here with the timeline. We first saw RTAs introduced on legislation in 1991, and what this did was it essentially created a temporary RTA for the southeastern region of Wisconsin. And it tasked this RTA with essentially making recommendations to the legislature and the governor about how this RTA should exist, identifying funding mechanisms, uh, its jurisdiction, all of that, in addition to recommending whether or not the RTA should be dissolved after the deadline. So in 93, the RTA produced a report. Sent it to the state, and it did recommend that it no longer be an RTA. So that's essentially where things were until 2005, when the legislature did the exact same thing. It just updated the dates in the statute, but it recreated the Southeastern RTA and then had it produce a report. But this time, the report suggested that it become permanent. So that leads to the Act 28 in 2009. And this act solidified the Southeastern RTA. It also created a mechanism for these three other RTAs to form if they wish to do so. Um, if they wanted to create an RTA, any of these three, they would have to, uh, at the county level, essentially adopt a resolution to form an RTA. Now, in the initial 2009 Act 28, when the legislation was sent to the governor, it had lines in it that made the formation and taxing authority of an RTA contingent on voter referendums. So essentially, if the RTA wanted to impose whatever tax it sought to do, it would require approval from the voters. But this was taken out through a line item veto. So none of that existed in the final form of Act 28. And subsequently, in 2011, that is when Act 32, which was the next biennial budget, dissolved all RTAs in Wisconsin and took away their ability to form. And that's essentially where we've been since. There's been multiple attempts to try to reintroduce legislation to create RTAs. Most of them in the past have not gone very far, state and committee and such. But one of the most successful attempts was back in 2013. There was Senate Bill 259, and this would have created an RTA for Fox Cities, and it essentially mirrored the uh, statutory language of the 2009 RTAs, except it reintroduced the contingency of using a voter referendum, basically, to approve formation and taxation. And we've also seen the executive budget proposals in 23 and 25 include RTA language, but in both instances, that has been taken out by the Joint Finance Committee before it's really gotten much discussion on the floor. So, yeah, that's essentially the history of RTAs from 91 until now. Wonderful. Uh, yeah, and so the now I'm just going to basically discuss how the RTAs were structured in that 2009 legislation. So it depends on the RTA, it's structured a little differently. So the southeastern one is just created by the statute because it already existed in its temporary form. The statute just basically made it permanent. Um, and the other three can only be created if a resolution is adopted at the county level. So there's slight variations in how it works with Dane County. They adopted at the county level, and it only includes Madison's metropolitan planning area as its jurisdiction. Um, with Chippewa Valley, ironically, Eau Claire has to adopt it, and then Chippewa Valley may join if they would like. And then for Chesapeake Bay, Ashland and Bayfield both have to adopt it, and then other counties can join if they would like. Um, but yeah, generally the jurisdiction of these RTAs is the counties that they exist in, excluding Madison, uh, and then any municipality that is even partially in the county. So, and this includes any additional members that might join. So, yeah, that's essentially how it laid out the formation of RTAs and what their jurisdiction would be. And then if we could, yeah. So in each case, the RTA is governed by a board of directors. The appointment process, again, varies slightly between them, but it essentially takes, it brings members in from multiple different sort of interest areas, whether it's the county or level of government. So we have the mayor of the major cities in each case, appointing one member, and then the governor also appoints one for each. There's some strange ones depending on which RTA we're discussing, like Dane County. Any mayor from a city with a population of 15,000 or more will appoint one member. But that's yeah, that's the only one with that contingency. But then we have for Chippewa Valley and Chesapeake Bay. This lays out the basis for the board of directors, who has to be on it and where they'd be appointed from. But additional members can be added, up to 17 members, um, if once the RTA forms, they decide to write into their bylaws that they'll have another member from this or that location. But if that agreement cannot be made, then this is just the baseline that's laid out in the legislation. Um, then yeah, so these are the different revenue generating mechanisms that were established, the really important element of RTAs. So with the Southeastern RTA, this one did not actually allow them to impose sales tax or excise taxes in their region. Their primary funding mechanism was to impose an $18 fee on short-term car rentals. So anytime a car was rented in Kenosha, Racine, or Milwaukee, then this would there would be an $18 fee that would go towards funding the RTA. And then in the other case, with these other three, they were given the ability to impose a sales tax of 0.5% and an excise tax of 0.5% within their jurisdiction. And then all four RTAs were given the ability to issue bonds payable to the revenue of the RTA. Um, so yeah, the board of directors can choose to implement any of these, if I mean, depending on the RTA and what's provided to that RTA, but uh, it requires a majority vote from the board of directors to implement any of these. Yeah. So then moving forward, I just a few things that might be important to keep in mind when we are trying to sort of make some progress in this area is to consider the general opposition that it has faced in the past. So there's just standard opposition to increasing taxes. But specifically with RTAs, there seems to be some concern about giving taxing power to a government entity when there isn't a significant amount of degree of democratic input towards that entity. And uh, that is seems to be sort of explained by if we look at Act 28 and the uh, areas of the statute that included referendums, in addition to the success of Senate Bill 259, which was very much a bipartisan supported bill. Both of them had the referendums in them when they made the progress that they did. And it was only once these were removed that they started facing a lot more backlash. And then also with the Southeastern RTA, we saw sort of a different way to go about it. It's where they spend a lot more time planning and basically figuring out the feasibility of the RTA and how it would work before finalizing it and truly forming. Unlike the other cases where the RTA forms and then sort of figures it out as they go. So these methods seem to be a bit more successful in getting bipartisan support for the measures. But yeah, it's certainly an uphill battle, and generally without these caveats, it does split on partisan lines in terms of voting in the legislature. And then also just lastly, the RTAs, in terms of lobbying efforts, almost all of them have been uh, in support of RTAs by different organizations, including the Sierra Club. But car rental companies lobbied strongly against the Southeastern RTA to have it abolished shortly before it was because of that $18 fee. So it's certainly a balance between trying to figure out the best way to fund an RTA, whether that's through taxes or a fee that allows it to enjoy enough political support to, exist. So yeah, and that is essentially all I have for the history of RTAs in Wisconsin. Um, yeah, so I will pass it back to our lovely host.
Thanks, Colton. That was great. And I know that I have had trouble following all of the various legislation. So thanks for breaking it down for us and kind of the play by play of what has happened in the last couple decades. Um, I think a lot of us are excited to hear about some local examples. So we're going to go back to Aaron to hear about the La Crosse area feasibility study. And then we have Megan Owen with us from Detroit to talk about the RTA there, and which is a newer RTA compared to some in the country. So we'll hear from Aaron about a study of what could be, and then Megan from something that is.
Thanks, Cassie. Can everyone see my screen okay? Just wanted to make sure that everything looks good.
Looks good.
Seeing some head nods. Perfect. So I this past year, in 2025, our MPO, we decided to start looking at RTAs under a feasibility study. Under IIJA, MPOs were given dedicated funding from Federal Highway Administration and from the Federal Transit Authority to start looking at complete street planning activities. While their criteria was very vague, we decided to propose to use some of that funding towards looking at RTAs and their feasibility in the state of Wisconsin, more specific to our region. We had heard from many constituents over the years of why it would be so important. We're analyzing our current transit systems in the La Crosse area and how there's big budget deficits that a lot of us across the nation are really facing, especially post-COVID, and what we can do about it. We've had in many transit plans over the past 10, 15 years of how an RTA could fix these problems. So we decided we didn't want to wait for state legislation and we wanted to move ahead with looking at the feasibility. So we proposed this to our state partners at the Wisconsin DOT and Minnesota DOT, because we are a bi-state MPO. and we got it approved. So we are very excited. We dedicated $75,000 of this budget to hire a consultant. We are working with SRF Consulting Group. We kicked it off in the summer of 2025, so we're in the works of it right now, but I'm happy to give a quick update on it. Let me go to the next slide here, hopefully. There we go. So I talked a little bit about what an RTA is. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide. I'm going to jump right into what our feasibility study is going to look at. So studying the feasibility of forming an RTA, we're looking to help identify opportunities for coordination, access for more equitable and sustainable funding structures that support both our urban and rural nature within our specific region. And then also really get buy-in from state and local governments and stakeholders so then they can use this data-driven approach to then put forward some legislation in the future. And I should preface too with something that was really important to us in this feasibility study is that it stays very data-driven and very technical, and we do not have political buy-in at this point. We want to keep it as nonpartisan as possible. So then we can't have any legislatures in the future that want to use this study and say, well, so and so had their name on it, they should be the ones pushing it forward. Or if there's any political battles in that regard, we didn't want any of that. So we're keeping it very technical, nonpartisan. We've had a lot of support locally to do this study as well from all of our transit providers, from our committees as well. We have a committee on transit and active transportation that really pushed forward to redefine the scope of what that committee does and advocate for transit a little bit further. So they're kind of serving as a steering committee for us. Our technical advisory committee that really serves with the planners, administrators, and engineers locally. And then as well as our policy board, which is made up of all the highest elected official in all of our member communities. So we've had support from everyone. We've had great feedback so far too. So like I said, we kicked off in the summer of 2025, and we're well underway, and we're projecting to have our activity to end in the spring of 2026. The final product will be a report with different briefing papers of each of the sections. So we're going to be talking about, we're doing a lot of engagement with our steering committee and local transit providers, as well as we're going to be looking at a legal and regulatory analysis. And thanks to Colton and a lot of the work that he did as an undergraduate student at UWL, looking at the previous histories of RTAs in Wisconsin, we use that as a foundation for some of what we're looking at right now. So we're very appreciative of the work that he's done. And as well, we're looking at different governance structures and scenarios, funding analyses, and then community and economic impact. And all of this will serve in different modelings that we're developing with the consultant right now. Right now we're in the data gathering phase. So looking at the Department of Revenue's sales tax structures, looking at existing conditions, and then other examples from other states where it has been successful. And this is just to give you a little understanding of the transit services specific to the La Crosse region. We have three transit providers, public transit providers, the Municipal Transit Utility, or the MTU. It operates primarily in the city of La Crosse, but does extend into other areas in our region, like Onalaska, as well as they partner with the city of La Crescent, Minnesota, and provide some transit there. DriftLink, which is a shared ride service and serves the city of Onalaska, Village of Holmen, and Village of West Salem. It is administered by the city of Onalaska in partnership with these other municipalities. And then the Scenic Mississippi Regional Transit. This is a weekday only commuter rural bus route. Um, Unfortunately, uh, with how the Smart Bus has in that it's rural in nature and it has really long commute routes. It is an expensive route to maintain. And unfortunately, because of not having a sustainable funding source and relying on our municipalities that are served by it to really volunteer their own budget to pay their fair share, the service is running in a deficit, and in November, the La Crosse County Board, who administers it, is proposing to cut the service entirely. So we're very disappointed to hear this is kind of the reality of the service right now, but we are looking to still include it in this RTA feasibility study to understand the potential of where it could be still if the service could be revived again. This is just a snapshot of what our annual ridership is and annual operating costs for each of our services. Um, we have not really recovered post-COVID from ridership, and that is really hard to, it's a hard reality. So advocating for people to take transit more has been a big push, and something that we really need to work more on, I think, is marketing our services here. However, DriftLink, the shared ride service, they have recovered post-COVID and their ridership is continually increasing every year. So we're very happy to hear that. And we're even looking to see if we can expand some of the service area for the DriftLink. So this is a quick snapshot of the maps. The one on the left side, the black lines there, that is the service area for the MTU route. It's kind of wonky looking map, but that is our municipal jurisdiction boundaries, and then a little bit into the Onalaska area, and then as well as French Island you see there. The town of Campbell, they have some of the service area, and then into La Crescent. Smart routes, they are served on you see in the blue on the right-hand side map of how far those routes go. It is multi-county service right there. So they have many stops along the way. And it is a weekday only commute bus. And then in the green shaded is the on-demand shared ride taxi. So understanding that public transit, the services that we have, we don't want that to be the only thing that's included in the feasibility study. So we are also looking at our specialized transportation services, knowing that that is all part of our public transit that serves us. We have non-emergency medical transportation providers, the county aging and disability resource center programs. We do have veteran-specific transportation services, taxi, Uber, Lyft, all of those transportation network companies. And then we do have tribal transportation programs because we do have some tribal nations in the La Crosse area. So transit funding in Wisconsin, like I did mention before, is typically funded with a mix of state, federal, and local dollars, and that it is eligible whether it is depending on if it's in an urban area or if it's in a rural area. We do have a mix within our MPO planning area. So the MTU and DriftLink, those are urban in nature, and then the Smart Bus, that is rural. So because of how that is distributed, there's different funding eligibilities. So these are just some of the federal, state, and funding. I'm getting in the weeds a little bit, but some of the federal funding structures, there's different sections that you have to apply for, and each different program has their own reporting requirements and guidelines that you have to follow. But overall, the federal and state funding over the last 10 years has significantly decreased, as well as political support for increasing that funding. We know that transit funding in the state budget has really decreased in this last budget. So, really advocating for increased funding can keep these services going. So more of what we're looking at outside of the RTA modeling structures, we're also looking at indicators for equitable distribution of services. So looking at different ways that we can improve some of our services. Certain indicators like zero vehicle households, low income population, major transit destinations, population, employment, things like that. And then also some of the population trends that are currently happening. We have some growing suburban communities within our area. We know that older adults are increasing population and in the rural areas and needing more services for medical, groceries, even jobs and activities that are mostly in more of the urban areas. And then newer development in communities that are mostly in the suburban areas. That's where we're seeing the highest growth and new housing being built. And this is, I just wanted to provide a quick example of some of the regional demographics that we're looking at. Zero vehicle households. Um, this is some census data that we are looking at, and I know it's a little hard to see, but just to give an example of what why it would be so important to certain households of needing to get around and why we should be providing for those folks. For example, the city of La Crosse, around 40% of the population are non-drivers. So maintaining the service in the city of La Crosse is allows for freedom for our 40% of our citizens to live, play, and work within our community. So it's extremely important that transit, especially in Wisconsin, where we have pretty harsh winters, that we have a safe and reliable system here. Some things that we're looking at, of course, we have to look at past plans and making sure we're not duplicating efforts and we can look back to what has already been said about it. So we just finished up our long range transportation plan. So we had some data that we were able to pull from that. La Crosse MTU has a transit development plan of looking at expanded and coordinated services. There's different county coordinated transit plans, comprehensive plans, all the likes really show of why these are all important to where we are now, and we don't want to duplicate any efforts there. So we did talk about the histories a little bit, so why it's important to look at some of the historical legislation. I'm not going to spend too much time on some of these because Colton did a really good job explaining where we were and where we can get to. So, and talking about where we can be today. So we do have some regional transit today. However, the biggest barrier of what we're advocating for in our study is to allow for the taxing authority for having more stable funding sources. So we're looking at what it could look like to have a regional sales tax implemented to be able to fund it. Certain governance structures here. So we would love for that to be included, knowing that where we are now is a step forward with allowing for certain governance and commission, multi-county transit commissions, but what we really need the next forward is that stable funding source. So again, Colton talked about this a little bit, so I'm not going to spend too much time on the commissions. Here's some examples too of some intergovernmental agreements. So our MTU, the DriftLink and the SMART, they all operate with under intergovernmental agreements, and those have gone well for us in the area. Our municipalities have worked well together, but again, they're not tied to the stable funding source. And oftentimes they operate under um, a municipal committee or commission, that one municipality that it might be the primary service provider organizes and operates under a voting structure. And that is all I have for you, talking about our RTA feasibility study. We're very excited to be looking at this and have the opportunity to start studying it. I know it's kind of unprecedented, especially for our region, to look at it at a MPO level. But I am going to stick around. For the sake of time, I do want to hand it back to Cassie, and then I'll stick around for any questions after.
Thanks so much, Erin. Yeah, and we'll have, I think, a good amount of time for questions at the end. So be thinking of those, be ready to ask. And now that we've heard a lot about Wisconsin and how important RTAs are and how we don't have them, I would love to hear from you, Megan, about a place that does have RTAs. What does that look like for you? What's the journey been like? What are some benefits that you've seen? Yeah, tell us about Detroit.
Absolutely. Well, greetings from the other side of the lake. I am thrilled to be able to share with you a little bit of our experience. And there's definitely an awful lot of similarities. Certainly Michigan and Wisconsin in general, but also with some of these journeys, because it took Michigan quite a while, and we had a whole bunch of failed efforts. I won't go in too much into the details, but there were several efforts back in the late 90s to get a regional transit authority created, and before I was involved. And even though they thought they had a deal on his last day in office, the governor vetoed it out of spite for a completely separate issue. And then they tried another way, an intergovernmental agreement. Um, and they started moving forward with the Detroit Area Regional Transit Authority. Um, and then actually there was a lawsuit that it wasn't set up properly and ended up getting thrown out in the courts. But so I guess I should have mentioned, yeah. So I run a nonprofit organization in the Metro Detroit area um, that works specifically on improving public transit and other affordable, sustainable mobility options. And when I started in 2007 with the organization, I really tried to dig in. What is the biggest barrier to Detroit having good quality transit? Because we don't. We've got some real limits. And a regional transit authority was definitely one of the big barriers. There is real value in having someone in charge of transit for the whole region. So in the Metro Detroit area, we have the city of Detroit that runs its own transit service within the city, its own bus service. Um, a bunch of the suburban communities had their own bus service, but those were a patchwork of like 60 of the 140 different municipalities across the three-county area were part of their transit system, but they had to vote on that every 4 years. And there was Ann Arbor, where the university is, was a whole separate system. So we had all of these different efforts, and nobody was really coordinating it. So it was a several year effort for us to get a regional transit authority created. And we did do it legislatively. And if someone wants to, was debating how much to share, but if somebody really wants to dig into the details of kind of how we got it done and all of the convoluted efforts, but I will say from probably 2009 to 2012, it was the focus of a major concerted effort from we had partner groups all across the state who were all working together to get a regional transit authority created specifically for Southeast Michigan. Now it's only for Southeast Michigan. Other communities unfortunately still don't have a specific RTA authority. They only have that sort of intergovernmental agreement, as was previously referenced. But we mobilized thousands of citizen petition signatures, more like please support messages, dozens of letters from business leaders, and strangely enough, we had a Republican governor who actually supported it and saw the real value. Um, uh, One of those last rare moderates. And but yeah, so it took quite a lot of challenge, and if people want, I can go into more. But we did get a regional transit authority created under state law, and it covers the four county areas. So uh, not only Wayne County, where the city of Detroit is, Oakland and Macomb County, the two biggest suburban communities, but and also Washtenaw County, where the city of Ann Arbor is, which is kind of separate, but the governor at the time was from there and wanted to make that connection. So all four communities are all part of it, and they cannot leave it under the legislation. Other counties can choose to join. There is a legislative mechanism for other counties to join, although none have. Um, there was a lot of debate on the voting structure. And in this case, each county executive gets to appoint two members to the board of directors. The city of Detroit gets an additional one, and then there's a non-voting member appointed by the governor. But even though these four counties have very different populations, the political compromise was that they would have to all agree. Uh, they do they do have the legal ability to levy funding. Unfortunately, Michigan's constitution doesn't allow for a sales tax. So our only options written within the RTA law were either property tax, which obviously a lot of things are funded under property tax, or a vehicle registration fee, which at first sounded good, but then opposition started calling it the birthday tax, because you register on your birthday and adding an extra, whatever, $50 or something onto that. Um, and we did once we were able to get that board of directors to agree to put a measure on the ballot in 2016, and unfortunately, due to a lot of very convoluted circumstances, it was very narrowly defeated. So even though we had a funding mechanism in place and we were able to get the board of the RTA and their supporters or the people who appoint them from the county execs, we were able to get them to put it on the ballot, but both because of a crazy Trump wave election and some bad decisions by the people running the campaign, it lost by less than 1% of the vote. We have not actually been able to get a funding measure back on the ballot since, which is a real frustration. But a little bit of that was by design. Again, the voting structure is really important and was a major sticking point. We had some very conservative county leaders when it was passed who demanded that every county would have a veto, basically. So in order to get a measure on the ballot, every single one of all four counties and the city of Detroit all have to unanimously agree to put a measure on the ballot or to make other major decisions. And that has become a real sticking point. So we're now looking at ways around that. That said, our RTA, even without a dedicated funding mechanism, has been able to have some real positive impact throughout the region. Nowhere near where we need to be. The Metro Detroit area still spends less than almost any other major metro region in the country, and our service is still pretty limited, but the RTA has achieved some good things. So they do a number of things. One, they coordinate service among the entire four county area, which can be pretty challenging to get agreement. And there's a lot of squabbles. There was a big battle as to also the point where all of the state and federal funding comes to the RTA and then is allocated out to the actual transit providers. Um, which could be a funding mechanism, but they don't utilize it. But they do. There were some real battles over how much money should go to which agency, but they were able to sort of coordinate on that. Uh, they've been able to identify one of their biggest strengths has been identifying gaps in the system and getting pilot funding, um, whether it's different federal grants or state grants or sometimes public-private partnerships to do pilot projects. They haven't been able to do anything really huge, but things like there was no transit connection between Detroit and Ann Arbor, which is kind of crazy. They're less than an hour apart driving. A ton of people go back and forth, but there was no transit connection. For years, we fought to get a commuter train connecting it because our Amtrak does go between the two cities. Um, but the RTA, while they weren't able to get the funding for a full train service, they were able to set up an express bus route. And while not nearly as sexy as a train, it's a pretty great bus route. It runs 10 or 12 times a day, so pretty good frequency. It's an express just from downtown to downtown. Um, and it's a pretty good, uh, very, very affordable. If you buy your tickets ahead of time, they're like $6 for a ride. We convinced them to put in a like a frequent rider pass for even less. It so they were able to get kind of temporary funding, including CMAQ, congestion mitigation air quality funds, and a state grant in order to do it as a pilot for 3 years. And it has been hugely popular. And now they're still trying to figure out how to get permanent funding, but they've been able to extend, again, some of these small pots of money to demonstrate important services like that. And per the question in the chat, it is run by Indian Trails, a private company that also runs the Michigan Flyer. So there's an airport service that called Michigan Flyer that Indian Trails operates. The RTA and the Ann Arbor Transit Authority both together contracted with Indian Trails. So Indian Trails runs it. So it's on a nice luxury motor coach. You can put all your luggage underneath. You can even fit a bike into the storage area. So yeah, it's run by the same folks that run the Michigan Flyer. So that's been running for almost 3 years and while not huge ridership numbers, have been steadily increasing. And every time people learn about it, they're thrilled. They also recently launched an airport express. There was no direct express bus that went from the airport to downtown Detroit. The suburban bus service ran a route, but it stopped whatever 30 different times in between and took forever and was not the most convenient way. So now there's an airport express that they're also running also through Indian Trails on these nice motor coaches. So they've been able to uh, develop to identify some of the gaps in the system, to help address some coordination issues, to develop some pilot services to demonstrate support, and then actually one of the early things that they did, again, the city's got a service, the suburbs have a service, but they weren't, but you usually had to transfer in between, which is crazy, especially for commuters. So one of the first things the RTA did was work with both the transit agencies to run an express route just to go along the two busiest corridors between the city and the suburbs. And again, they were only able to come up with funding to run it maybe once an hour. It wasn't an ideal system, but it demonstrated huge interest and weekend ridership doubled. And then the suburban bus system decided that was so popular that they took it over and are now running 20-minute service on 3 major routes between the city and the suburbs. So there were a couple of examples where they tried something out with some pilot funding, and then they figured out other ways to keep it going. Um, Trying to remember, I should have made some notes as to other things that I wanted um, to share. We again the funding structure the voting structure is really important. And I wish we didn't have that veto from each county, because now we've got 3 of the counties fully on board with more funding, but one is really stuck in the mud and refuses to let a new measure back on the ballot. So now we're trying to figure out alternate ways to get a funding measure on the ballot for the region, and trying to figure out if we need to do something smaller, like just the urbanized area. So there are still some definite hiccup challenges with voting structures, with vetoes in certain communities, with um, funding mechanisms that are even permitted. Maybe if we could put a sales tax on the ballot, there might be less opposition because, again, property taxes feel like such a burden. Um, but they have been able to make some real positive progress, and are a great central voice to coordinate all of these other services. I can certainly answer questions that y'all might have about it, but I'm thrilled to be able to share, and I hope that both that you guys are able to enable these, and that we can also figure out how to allow some of the smaller communities to do the same.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Megan. And what a good reminder that RTAs are such an important step, and they are powerful, and they're not a fix-all mechanism. So our work will not be done if and when we have RTAs, but it can set up some success. So thank you for kind of balancing challenges and benefits of your RTA. So thank you so much, Erin, Colton, and Megan. We've got about 5 minutes, so we can take, I think, maybe 2 questions or so. Did anyone not have a question answered in the chat? I think most people were chatting back and forth, and other participants were answering. So if you put something in the chat, feel free to come off mute if your question wasn't answered. Otherwise, does anyone else have a question?
Oh, this is Jeremy up in Eau Claire. Um, it's interesting what La Crosse is doing with, doing a feasibility study of RTA, like through the MPO. And I guess I'm just kind of wondering why the focus was on RTA as opposed to just like what regional transit could look like from like a design and need standpoint. And like coming up with costs for various services that would be desired, and then kind of figuring out the funding, like how you actually get that funding later. Because I feel like an RTA is a little technical for some people in terms of visualizing what it would actually do for their community. And if you really focused on what service would be provided and the level of service, that might be a little bit more tangible for people.
Yeah,
So
I
I'm
think
just kind
that's
of wondering why you approached it that way.
yeah, that's a great question. So, as an MPO, we've supported our transit development plans over the past years. We're actually going to be looking at that again, which is eligible for other types of federal funding to support a very structured service feasibility plan. Why we wanted to do an RTA focus is understanding that this is something that has been a recommendation out of those service development plans in the past years, and how those types of funding structures, if we look at it at a feasibility and financial standpoint, but also looking at what types of services we should be prioritizing, um, how we could then push it towards legislation in the future. So having it be more technical, we wanted it more focused, not just for the lay person and the average citizen. We wanted it to be more for our legislation than after.
So a lot of what I just described has already been done, is what you're saying, essentially, that you've already envisioned what a regional transit system would look like. In a sense, you've already had one with SMRT a little bit as well. So we haven't had
Essentially,
anything
yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we would, so with our um, transit development plans, it's very focused on the La Crosse MTU, which is our municipal transit utility service. I think without having a study done that looks more regionally, not just for the feasibility standpoint, but also includes aspects of the governance structure and the services provided there. This was a way that we could get all of our other transit providers on board to look at it in the same scope.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks. Let's hear from David next.
Yeah, I actually just wanted to hop on Jeremy's comments and say in the Madison area, we have talked about that exact kind of a plan where we look beyond our current service levels and really look kind of 20, 30 years into the future. Dane County is growing very, very, very rapidly. And so, I think we're in a position where we really need to be planning for 25 years into the future. I work for Sun Prairie, and they're expected to add another 25,000 people to the city. It's at 40,000 now. And so we really have to have those conversations. I think to what Aaron was saying, I think RTAs are also just a key part of organizing. So it helps to, I think, alleviate some of the governance issues that you have when you have a lot of local city councils having to all vote and agree on contracts kind of like every year or every couple of years. And so it can just make that process a lot messier. Whereas RTA is really a helpful governing entity that can do both the planning and then also the funding. So I just want to say I'm excited to see what La Crosse is doing. I think a lot of us in the state are excited to see what the results are.
Well said. Thank you, David.
Thanks. So we're about at time. I'd invite any of our speakers to share any final thoughts. Megan, I saw you put something in the chat. So if you want to voice that, and then Colton and Aaron.
Yeah, no, I was just going to note, I didn't mention that the RTA does do a regional transit master plan that really kind of, here's what we have in the region, here's the strengths and what's working really well, here's the gaps and the things that we're going to try to address. They've ranged over the years from really big visions to kind of simple action plans, but that is also a nice thing. So, but yeah, if anyone has questions, happy to answer them on, or I'll put my contact info. But good luck.
Thank you, Colton, Aaron.
I just want to say the question of can slides be shared? Yes, I will send them to Cassie. I'll actually just put my contact information in the slides as well. So then if anyone has any questions about what we're doing or want to stay updated on our process, I'm happy to connect.
Yeah, and same with my slides. And basically just love to thank the other two speakers. Those were some wonderfully informative topics. So yeah, that's all I've got.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all so much. Thanks for the good questions. And this is just the start of us sort of reopening the conversation about RTAs in our state. I think many of us see some possibilities upcoming that we haven't had in a while here. So this will not be the end of it from Sierra Club either. So stay tuned. Thank you all for coming and enjoy the rest of your week without driving.
Thank you.